You've tried everything else. You've trusted people who broke you. You chased dreams that drained you. You gave your heart to folks who didn't know how to hold it. But now, it's time to put God first. Not second. Not when it's convenient. Not just on Sundays. First in your time. First in your thoughts. First in your finances. First in your fight. Because when you put God first, everything else aligns. I said everything you've been taught to hustle, to grind, to stay up late and wake up early. The world glorifies the hustle. The culture shouts, if you don't work, you don't eat. And that's true. But hear me loud and clear. God does not bless your hustle. He blesses your obedience. Let that settle deep into your spirit. Because there's a difference between busy and blessed. A difference between movement and momentum. Just because you're in motion doesn't mean you're in God's direction. You can spend your whole life hustling for a door that God never told you to knock on, and then wonder why your knuckles are bruised and the door won't open. Listen to me. God is not required to open doors you forced your way toward. He's not obligated to bless a plan He never wrote. Take this in. There are people working 18 hours a day, burning out, maxing out credit cards, missing birthdays, sacrificing marriages, all for a dream God never gave them. They call it ambition, but heaven calls it disobedience in disguise. Let me give you an example. There's a woman, single mom, grinding day and night to build a beauty business. She's talented, she's fierce, she's on fire. But every night, she collapses in bed with tears in her eyes, exhausted, because no matter how hard she works, it never quite breaks through. And one day she sits still, just for 5 minutes, and hears God whisper, I never called you to build that. I called you to teach. That was your gift. That was your light. See, she was hustling in the wrong direction. And the moment she shifted and obeyed, blessings flowed. Clients came to her. The stress disappeared. Peace replaced panic. Because God funds His ideas, not your good intentions. Another example, a young man, fresh out of college, gets a high-paying job in tech. Big money, big city, big status. Everyone's proud. But every night, he feels this emptiness he can't shake. Anxiety through the roof. Purpose, non-existent. Until one night, he has a breakdown, and in the silence, God tells him, I didn't send you there to code software. I sent you there to reach broken people in the workplace. Your job was never your purpose, it was your platform. Oh, come on, somebody. Hear this. Purpose isn't always found in the paycheck, it's found in the assignment. And the assignment is unlocked through obedience. You see, hustle says, I got this. Obedience says, God lead me. Hustle says, let me network, let me strategize, let me manipulate the moment. Obedience says, if God said it, I'm gonna do it, even if it looks crazy to the world. Some of y'all are running in circles, busy, burned out, bitter, because you're building a life with bricks God never gave you. You're copying blueprints from Instagram instead of downloading purpose from heaven. Here's another one. A couple married for 10 years, fighting every day, hustling to keep the marriage looking pretty for social media, posting cute anniversary photos. But behind the scenes, it's war. They're trying to fix it through books, advice, retreats. Nothing's working. And finally, they humble themselves, pray together for the first time in years. And God shows them it wasn't about the methods, it was about the missed obedience to honor and serve each other. Breakthrough came, not from effort, but from surrender. Let me say this boldly. God is not impressed by your grind if your heart is out of alignment. You can have a full schedule and an empty soul. You can build an empire and lose your peace. Obedience is where the oil flows. It's the place of provision. When Abraham took Isaac to that mountain, he didn't hustle, he didn't negotiate, he didn't overthink it, he obeyed. And on that same mountain, God had already prepared the ram, Provision waits at the place of obedience, not the place of ambition, not the place of comfort, the place where faith meets instruction. And don't get it twisted, obedience will cost you. It'll make you look foolish. It'll make you walk away from what's safe. It'll make you give up something that everybody else would kill to keep. But the reward on the other side, peace like a river, joy like a fountain, favor that doesn't make sense. I'm talking to the one who's been spinning wheels. You've got the brand, the website, the followers, but you don't got God. And deep down you know it, because nothing satisfies, nothing sustains, because hustle fuels ego, but obedience fuels legacy. There's a reason why Jesus said, "My sheep know my voice," not "my hustlers know my strategy." He's not calling you to outwork everybody. He's calling you to outtrust everybody. Because the battle isn't yours, it's the Lord's. And sometimes the most powerful move isn't the grind, it's the yes. So next time you're tempted to move faster, ask yourself, am I obeying or am I just busy? Because God doesn't bless noise, He blesses obedience. Your plan might be good, it might even be great. It might be written in color-coded journals with bullet points and deadlines. You might have a vision board, a 10-year goal, and a 5-step formula for success. But let me tell you something that will shake your spirit. God's plan is perfect. Yours might be shiny, but His is sovereign. Yours might make sense on paper, but His carries purpose. See, there's a dangerous confidence we put in our own understanding, in our degrees, in our networks, in our experiences. But the Bible says, lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct your paths. That's not poetry, that's strategy, that's survival. Let me show you something real. There's a woman who always dreamed of being a lawyer. She had the grades, the drive, the discipline. She got accepted to her dream law school. Everybody clapped. Her parents were proud. Her future looked airtight. But one semester in, her spirit felt sick. Not her body, her spirit. She was excelling, but empty, winning but weeping behind closed doors. And then came the whisper, "This was your plan, but it's not my purpose." It shook her. She fought it, cried about it, prayed about it. But the more she ignored God's tug, the heavier the burden became. Until one night, in tears on the dorm room floor, she surrendered, dropped law school, picked up the calling she always ignored, writing. Today, she's a published author, healing souls with her words, touching nations, not in a courtroom, but through obedience. Here's what you gotta hear. God's plan doesn't always look prestigious, but it's always powerful. You may think your plan is failing, but maybe God is just wrecking it to make room for His glory. You're looking at disappointment, but heaven sees redirection. Let me tell you about a man who spent 15 years in corporate, climbing ladders, closing deals, breaking records. He had it all, money, status, title, but he also had migraines, anxiety attacks, and zero peace. Every time he prayed, he heard start a mentorship program for inner city youth. But how could he walk away from 6 figures to do that? He ignored it, postponed it, doubted it, but the unrest grew louder than the paycheck. So he obeyed, quit, started with 5 kids, then 20, then 100. Now, his program is in 6 cities. He's impacting lives, saving souls. And guess what? Provision followed obedience. Sponsors came, investors came, purpose showed up where pressure once lived. Some of you are stuck not because you're lazy, but because you're stubborn. You're addicted to your plan. You're holding on to what looks right, instead of surrendering to what is right. And God is saying, if you just release it, I could reveal it. If you'd stop managing the outcome, I could manifest the overflow. There's a girl who wanted to get married by 25. She had it all planned. Her Pinterest wedding board, her dream dress, even her kids' names. She dated with that timeline in mind. forced relationships, ignored red flags, and every time something failed, she cried like God was against her. But God wasn't denying her, He was protecting her. See, delay doesn't mean denial. Sometimes it means divine preservation. At 32, she finally met a man who didn't just love her, he honored her, covered her, prayed with her, because now she was ready, not just to be a wife, but to be whole. That was God's timing, not hers. Because His plan isn't built on our clocks, it's built on our character. And sometimes He won't give you what you want until you become who you need to be. And listen, God's plan doesn't always start with applause. Sometimes it starts in isolation, in silence, in the wilderness. Moses was on the backside of the desert. Joseph was in prison. David was watching sheep. Jesus in a manger, because what's born in obscurity often carries the most glory. I'm talking to the one who's frustrated. You're watching others get ahead. You're watching timelines pass. You're wondering if you missed it. But I came to remind you, your plan was safe, but His plan is supernatural. Your plan might give you clout. His plan gives you calling. There's a couple that tried for years to conceive. Doctors said it wasn't possible, so they started planning adoption, then surrogacy, then IVF, but nothing worked. Their faith was breaking, until one day, they stopped trying to plan around God and just surrendered to Him. 1 year later, without treatment, they conceived naturally and named that baby Promise. Because when God writes the plan, He also supplies the miracle. He supplies the strength. He supplies the timing. He supplies the favor. You don't have to manufacture what God wants to manifest. You don't need backup plans when you're walking in divine purpose. You just need faith. Faith to pause, faith to wait, faith to obey, when it makes no sense to anybody but heaven. So no matter how flawless your blueprint looks, if God didn't draft it, it's just a dream, not a destiny. You can't say you're putting God first if your schedule never shows Him. If your day starts with emails, meetings, Instagram scrolls, and breakfast plans, but prayer is an afterthought, and His word is a once-a-week snack, you're not prioritizing God. You're fitting Him in like a leftover appointment. Let me tell you the hard truth. If God is not first, everything else is out of order, no matter how well it's functioning. I know people who say, I don't have time to pray. I'm too busy. But do you realize prayer is the oxygen for your purpose? Prayer is not a luxury. It's the foundation. Imagine trying to drive a car with no gas because you were too busy to stop at the station. That's what skipping God looks like. You're running full speed on empty. There's a young entrepreneur I know, sharp, ambitious, hungry. He launched his startup with all the right tools, a mentor, funding, a solid business model. But 6 months in, everything started crumbling. Clients left, systems crashed, confidence tanked. He came to me and said, "Why is everything falling apart?" And I asked, "Where is God in your day?" He paused, thought, then said, I thank Him sometimes. Thanking God and prioritizing God are not the same thing. See, he had passion, but no presence, drive, but no direction. He built a house without a cornerstone. So he shifted, started waking up early, made devotion the first meeting of the day, got on his knees before getting on Zoom, and something happened. His clarity came back. His confidence returned. The business didn't just revive, it evolved. Because when God is first, alignment follows, favor flows, confusion clears. I know a single mother of 2, working double shifts, barely sleeping, trying to keep her sanity. She told me, "I don't have the energy to pray. I'm surviving." I said, "You don't need 2 hours. You need 2 minutes with power." And she tried it, in her car before clocking in the bathroom between tears. Just whispers like, "God, I need you. Order my steps. Strengthen me." That woman said her mind changed. Not her job, not her income, her mind. Because when God is first in your thoughts, He becomes first in your outcomes. You've got to understand, God doesn't want a guest pass in your life. He wants the master key. And when he gets that, he doesn't just bless your plans, he transforms them. You're not asking him to join your ride, you're giving him the wheel. There's a married couple I counseled, beautiful family, good careers, but they were distant, physically present, emotionally divided. They did therapy, retreats, books, nothing worked, until one day, they both committed to putting God first together. That means praying before arguments, reading the Word, instead of weaponizing their words, worshiping when their pride said, stay silent, and little by little, the walls fell, love flowed again. Because when God is first in a relationship, egos die, and grace rises. You stop fighting each other, and start fighting for each other. It's not just about Sunday service. It's not about saying thank you God after you win. It's about saying lead me, God, before you start, before the meeting, before the decision, before the date, before the deal. Because when God is your source, you don't chase validation, you carry authority. There's a high school student I met, struggling with peer pressure, wanted to fit in, but also wanted to stand out for God. He asked me, how do I put God first when everyone around me doesn't care? I told him, being different isn't a punishment, it's a platform. He started carrying his Bible to school, not to preach, but to stay anchored. Started praying before tests, speaking life over his friends. A year later, 3 classmates gave their lives to Christ through his example. Because when you put God first, you become a thermostat, not a thermometer. You set the temperature. You don't just survive the culture, you shape it. And let me say this to the creatives, the singers, the dancers, the influencers. Your talent is a gift, but it's not your God. I've seen people worship their platform more than their provider. They post about everything, but pray about nothing. But when storms hit, likes can't heal you, views won't cover you, only his presence will. So put him first, before the platform grows, or the spotlight will expose what prayer could have healed. There's a nurse I know, works overnight, constant emergencies, lives at the edge of life and death. She said every time she walks into the hospital, she lays her hands on the doors and says, God, I go in, but you lead. And in the middle of chaos, she walks with peace. Because when God is first, even the ICU becomes sacred ground. Putting God first isn't about religion, it's about rhythm. It's the rhythm of waking up and saying, before I scroll, I seek. It's the rhythm of facing bad news and saying, God, what do you say? It's the rhythm of putting down your pride and picking up your purpose. Because everything you're building will crumble if the foundation isn't Him. You're not too busy. You're distracted. You're not too tired. You're misaligned. The moment you shift God from the background to the forefront, life doesn't get easier. It gets anchored. Storms still come, but now they don't shake you. Obstacles still rise, but now they don't break you. Because when God is first, everything else falls into place, even if it falls apart first. You can't keep asking God for answers while holding on to the very things He's trying to remove. Some of us are praying for clarity, but we're still cuddling confusion. We're asking for peace while holding on to chaos, begging for healing, but refusing to let go of the habits that keep reopening the wound. How can you be filled when your hands are already full of what's breaking you? I once sat with a woman who was crying over a relationship that had ended. She told me, I prayed and asked God to remove what's not meant for me, and then He left. I looked at her and said, so you got your answer. Sometimes God doesn't subtract to punish you. He subtracts to protect you. But the problem is, we keep chasing what He's already canceled. We keep texting what He blocked. We keep reopening doors that He already closed with thunder. There's a man I know who was in a job he hated. Every Sunday night, he felt sick to his stomach. He prayed, God, show me my purpose. And then out of nowhere, he got laid off. He panicked, thought he was cursed. But in that quiet space, with no job title, no meetings, no noise, he rediscovered a dream he'd buried, started a business, took a risk. Now he's thriving, not surviving. See, sometimes what feels like a breakdown is a divine breakthrough in disguise. But here's the issue. We're addicted to what's familiar, even when it's dysfunctional, even when it's draining us. I've watched people stay in relationships where they are unappreciated, unloved, unnoticed, because the pain is familiar. But let me tell you something. God is not trying to take anything from you. He's trying to make room for something bigger. The problem is, we keep treating his pruning like punishment. But you don't get fruit without a cut. A friend of mine had to walk away from a friendship she'd had for 10 years. They'd grown in different directions. The energy had turned toxic. The conversations became complaints. But she kept holding on, because of history, because of time, until she realized history doesn't equal destiny. Some people are part of your story, but not your legacy. And when she let go, new voices entered her life. Voices that called her higher, not kept her lower. You ever seen someone try to swim while holding onto a rock? That's what some of us are doing, trying to move forward while clutching the weights of our past. Regret, bitterness, fear. But the moment you release that rock, you rise, because you were built to float, not sink. And God says, let go, so I can lift you. There's a college student who once told me, I want to go deeper with God, but I'm still hanging out with people who mock faith. I said, you can't run with wolves and expect to soar with eagles. Sometimes elevation requires separation. It's not personal, it's purposeful. When God starts calling you higher, he'll start exposing the anchors. And when he shows you what to let go of, obedience is the only door to freedom. Another story. A woman I know was battling an addiction. Private pain, public smile. She kept asking, God, heal me. But every time he whispered, get help, she ignored it. Because pride says I'm okay. But healing begins where honesty begins. One day, she hit rock bottom and finally surrendered. Joined a recovery group. Spoke her truth. Faced her fears. Now she leads others out of the same pit she once cried in. Because what you release, God can redeem. Sometimes it's not even about relationships or habits. It's about mindsets. You're holding on to the belief that you're not enough, that your past defines you, that you're too late, too broken. But those are lies the enemy plants to keep you stuck. You've got to let go of the labels. Let go of the voices that told you you'll never make it. Because God didn't call you by your shame. He called you by your name. There's a man who built his whole identity on being the provider. Got sick, lost his job, felt worthless. But in that valley, he discovered that his value wasn't in his paycheck. It was in his presence. He started mentoring young men, volunteering, praying. God took away what he thought he needed and gave him what he truly needed: impact. You've got to trust that when God says release, he's already prepared the replacement. But he won't give it while your fists are clenched around counterfeits. Your healing, your peace, your next level, it's on the other side of release. And yes, it hurts. Yes, it's scary. But nothing new can grow in soil that's already full of weeds. If you want the harvest, you have to do the weeding. Let me say it like this. If your hands are full of bricks from the past, how will you ever build the future? You can't carry purpose and pain in the same grip. Choose what to release. Choose who to walk away from. Choose to obey before you understand. Because sometimes obedience feels like loss, but it's actually the setup for overflow. There's power in the surrender, not weakness. Power. When you finally say, God, I'm done forcing what doesn't fit. I'm done begging for crumbs. I'm done patching broken glass with bare hands. That's when heaven moves. That's when doors open. That's when what you thought was the end becomes the introduction to the best chapter you never wrote yourself. Because when God is writing the story, every loss becomes a lesson that leads to your promotion. You don't plant seeds and expect fruit the next morning. You water, you wait, you believe. And that's how faith works. It's not magic, it's trust. It's the audacity to keep showing up, even when you see no signs. Faith is waking up, day after day, doing what God told you to do, even when you feel like nothing's changing. It's trusting that the invisible hand of God is moving behind the scenes, even when your eyes see silence. Faith isn't about the absence of struggle, it's about the presence of perseverance. A man once told me he'd been praying for a breakthrough in his business for years. Nothing happened. He was ready to give up. He said, "I've tithed, I've prayed, I've been faithful, but I still see no results." I looked him in the eye and said, "Do you know how bamboo grows? For the first 5 years, nothing happens above the surface, but underground, the roots are going deep. And then in 1 year, it shoots up over 80 feet. That's faith. Just because you don't see it, doesn't mean God isn't doing it. You ever been in a gym, working out for weeks, and looking in the mirror thinking, why do I still look the same? But your body is changing, internally first. Muscles are growing, fat is burning, endurance is building. The change is silent before it becomes visible. Faith is the same. It strengthens in private, grows in the dark. Faith is the courage to keep pushing, knowing that growth doesn't always make noise. A woman I know was trying to conceive for years, prayed, cried, fasted. Every month was another heartbreak. Yet she kept showing up in church, praising like she already had what she was praying for. That's faith. Faith is singing in the storm, not because the storm is gone, but because you believe the sun is coming. Eventually God gave her twins, not because of her strength, but because of her unwavering faith. Faith doesn't change God, it changes you until you're ready for what you've asked for. Sometimes faith means quitting a job when God says go, even when there's no backup plan. I've seen it happen. A young man left his corporate job after years because he felt called to start something that served others. Everyone called him crazy. You're risking your future, they said. But he said, I'd rather risk my comfort than miss my calling. 2 years later, his nonprofit is feeding thousands. Faith looks foolish until it becomes fruit. There's a mother raising 3 kids on her own. Her husband walked out. She works 2 jobs, barely making it. But every morning, she lays hands on her children and prays over them, speaks life into them. She doesn't have much, but she has faith. And that faith builds a legacy. Because faith isn't just for miracles, it's for Monday mornings. It's for the ordinary grind. It's for when you're tired, but you still choose to believe. Faith isn't a feeling, it's a fight. A man told me once, I keep asking God to open doors, but nothing's moving. I said, what if the door you're knocking on isn't the one he built for you? See, faith sometimes means closing doors yourself and trusting that the right one is worth the wait. It means turning down the wrong offer, walking away from the wrong person, saying no to something good because you're believing for something God. Faith is not settling for what's available, it's waiting for what's divine. There's a young woman I mentored who dreamed of being a writer. Everyone told her to get a real job, but she felt called to tell stories that healed. For years, she wrote blogs that nobody read, posted videos that barely got views. But she didn't stop. She said, even if only one person is touched, I'll keep going. One day, a publisher found her work and offered her a deal. Now her words are on shelves around the world. Faith is doing what you're called to do, even when it looks like nobody's watching. Because God is. You know what's wild? Sometimes faith means staying when everything in you wants to run. A couple I counseled were on the brink of divorce. Years of hurt, miscommunication, and silence had built a wall between them. But instead of giving up, they chose to pray, to fight for each other, to see the good. It wasn't easy, but over time, the wall cracked, then crumbled. They found love again, not in the absence of pain, but in the decision to believe again. Faith doesn't always change your situation, it changes your heart. There's a teenager who told me, everyone around me is doing their own thing. Nobody's into faith like me. I feel alone. I told him, you're not alone. You're chosen. Sometimes faith isolates you before it elevates you, because God needs to remove the noise so you can hear his voice. Faith will often put you in rooms where you feel misunderstood. But don't shrink. Don't dilute. You weren't made to blend in. You were made to stand out. Faith is walking boldly in rooms that weren't built for you, knowing God is your architect. You cannot hear God in a storm if you keep feeding the storm. Let me say that again. You cannot hear the voice of peace while you keep entertaining the noise of chaos. People say, I can't hear from God. But when was the last time you turned off the world? When was the last time you silenced your phone, shut off the noise, and sat still? Not scrolling, not planning, not running, just sat still and listened. The problem isn't that God isn't speaking. The problem is that we've turned up the volume on everything else. I met a woman who told me, I'm so stressed all the time. I pray, but I don't feel anything. I asked her, when do you pray? She said, on my way to work, while driving, while cooking, while handling the kids. I told her, you're doing all the talking, but are you doing any listening? Prayer is not a one-way monologue. It's a dialogue with the divine. And sometimes God doesn't shout, he whispers. And to hear a whisper, you've got to be still. You've got to lean in. There's a man who wakes up at 5 a.m. every day. Before he checks his messages, before he hits the gym, before he scrolls, he spends 30 minutes just in quiet. No music, no requests, just gratitude and listening. And he says, those 30 minutes keep me sane. Because the world will throw chaos at you the second you open your eyes. But when you tune your frequency to heaven first, the rest of the day has to adjust to that peace. You set the tone by who you give your attention to first. You can't keep feeding your fear and expect your faith to grow. You can't binge negativity, drama, gossip, and then wonder why your spirit feels dry. What you consume becomes your consciousness. What you focus on multiplies. If you're constantly plugged into anxiety, that becomes your baseline. But if you feed your soul with truth, worship, stillness, you build an inner sanctuary that chaos can't touch. You don't have to escape the storm to find peace. You have to anchor yourself deeper. One woman told me, I can't even hear myself think. Between work, kids, social media, I feel like I'm losing myself. I said, that's because you've given your energy to everything except the one who sustains it. You need to reclaim your stillness, not just physical stillness, but emotional stillness. Stillness is not the absence of motion. It's the presence of purpose. It's waking up and saying, before I answer anyone, I'm going to listen to God. It's the strength to pause before you respond, to breathe before you break. I know a college student who told me, every time I try to sit in silence, I get anxious. I feel like I need to check something, do something. I told him, that's not anxiety, that's detox. You're not addicted to activity, you're addicted to distraction, and silence feels like withdrawal. But here's the thing, God's wisdom doesn't compete for attention. He waits for the room. He doesn't interrupt your chaos. He invites you out of it. And when you finally get still enough, you'll realize the silence isn't empty. It's full of answers. A businessman once asked me, why does it feel like I have no direction? I told him, you're asking God for a GPS signal, but you're in an elevator with no reception. Step out of the noise. You don't get signal in the basement of your busyness. You get signal on the mountaintop of solitude. You have to elevate your spirit. Disconnect from the distractions. Clarity isn't a product of effort. It's a result of environment. When you change your atmosphere, you change your answers. There's a difference between being busy and being fruitful. And some people are addicted to busy, thinking it means progress. But what if the enemy of your destiny isn't evil? It's distraction. The devil doesn't need to destroy you. He just needs to keep you too distracted to hear God. Stillness is warfare. Silence is strategy. Peace is a weapon. Because when you are anchored, the storm can rage, but it won't move you. I remember a single mother who created a God corner in her apartment. A small chair, a candle, and her Bible. That was her sacred space. Every night, after the kids were asleep, she would sit there in silence. No phone, no pressure, just presence. She said, that chair became my healing place. You don't need a monastery. You don't need a mountain. You just need to make room. Because when you make room for God, He fills it with direction, restoration, and strength. I once walked into a forest early in the morning.
The air was crisp, the birds were singing, everything felt alive. But what struck me most was the quiet. It was the kind of quiet that speaks, and it reminded me, this is how God designed creation. Still, ordered, peaceful, and yet, we've trained ourselves to run from the very atmosphere our soul needs. Stillness is your soul's native language. You were made for it, and in that quiet, you will find not only God, but yourself again.
There comes a moment in life when you've got to stop chasing temporary people and start chasing eternal purpose. See, too many of us are giving permanent energy to temporary people. We are pouring our loyalty into people who wouldn't even give us a drop of their honesty. We're adjusting our standards, our time, our boundaries, just to be liked, just to feel accepted, just to not be alone. But here's the truth. When you prioritize people over purpose, you lose both. But when you prioritize purpose, the right people align themselves without force. I met a young man who said, "I'm exhausted. I'm always helping everyone, being there for people. But when I need someone, it's like I'm invisible." I looked at him and said, "You're not drained because you're too generous. You're drained because you're investing in people. God never told you to carry. You've got to ask yourself, who sent them into your life? Was it divine purpose or emotional desperation? Because when God sends someone, there is peace. When desperation sends someone, there is confusion. There's a woman I know who was in a relationship for 7 years. She kept holding on, saying, maybe he'll change. Maybe if I just love harder. But every year, she became less of herself. She lost her voice, her laughter, her sparkle. And one day she woke up and realized, I've been praying for God to fix a relationship He never authored. You can't ask God to bless what He never built. That man was her lesson, not her destiny. And when she let go, when she stopped idolizing the connection, she found freedom she didn't even know she needed. Too often we confuse loyalty with wisdom. Being loyal to someone who's breaking you isn't strength, that's bondage. You're not supposed to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. You weren't created to bleed quietly while others feast off your kindness. Let me say this, with fire in my bones. Some of y'all are in emotional prisons with people who were only meant to teach you one chapter, not write your whole book. And until you close that chapter, God can't release the next one. I once spoke to a corporate executive, successful, powerful, influential. But behind the suits and the smile, he was broken. He said, I don't even know who I am anymore. I've lived my whole life trying to be who others needed me to be. And I said, that's the danger of performance-based identity. You become a puppet to people's expectations, and you lose your God-given blueprint. You were not created to please everyone. You were created to fulfill a purpose. And when you stop living for applause and start living for alignment, that's when everything shifts. It's not just about relationships, it's about attention. Who are you giving your attention to? What consumes your focus? Because every distraction disguised as a friend, a habit, a craving, costs you something. There's a man I know who deleted every social media app for a year. People laughed, mocked him, said he'd disappear. But in that year, he wrote a book, healed from depression, started a business, and found his peace again. Why? Because what you starve will die, and what you feed will grow. When you starve distraction, you birth destiny. There's this young woman who had a huge heart, always giving, always present for others. But she kept getting used, manipulated, lied to. She asked me, how do I stop attracting the wrong people? I said, you don't attract what you want, you attract what you tolerate. When you raise your standards, you repel nonsense. You don't have to explain your boundaries to people who value you. Stop breaking yourself into pieces just so someone can feel whole. The right people won't need to see you broken to appreciate your beauty. I once visited a friend's house, and she had this stunning plant wall. I asked her how she kept them all alive. She said, I water them differently. Some daily, some weekly, some only once a month. Each one has different needs. And I thought, wow, that's how we should treat our connections. Discern who needs your daily attention and who only needs occasional contact. Not every relationship is meant to be maintained at the same intensity. And if you give weakly people daily access, you'll dry out emotionally. Sometimes, elevation requires separation. You cannot carry everyone into your next level. Some people were your comfort, but not your calling. They were your circle, but not your covenant. And when God starts shifting you, don't be surprised if people fall off. Some exits are not betrayals, they're blessings in disguise. Learn to say thank you when people walk away. That's God's way of decluttering your life for divine connections. Let me remind you of this. Even Jesus had to separate from the crowd to fulfill his mission. He loved them, but he didn't let them distract him. He healed them, but he didn't let them define him. And he knew the purpose on your life will always attract people who either support you or try to sabotage you. Your job is to discern who's who. When you put God first, he gives you that clarity, that sharpness, that knowing. And once you have that baby, there's no force on earth that can pull you back into people pleasing again. Some of the most dangerous words we ever whisper to ourselves are, "I'll start tomorrow." But what if I told you that delay is the enemy of destiny? That putting off your spiritual growth, your calling, your healing, one more day, one more week, one more season, is costing you more than you can afford to lose. Because when you delay obedience, you delay deliverance. And when you delay seeking God, you delay the answers you've been crying for at midnight. I met a woman once who said, "I know I need to get right with God, but right now, life's just too busy." She was juggling her career, raising 2 kids, and holding on to a toxic relationship. She said, "Once things settle down, I'll give God my full attention." Months passed, and life didn't settle. It got heavier. And one day she broke down and said, "I thought I had time, but now I feel like I'm drowning." I looked her in the eyes and told her, "If you wait until life calms down to seek peace, you'll never find it. You don't make time for God when life is perfect. You find God in the chaos, and he gives you strength to overcome it." Let me make this plain. Comfort is a liar. Comfort tells you there's no urgency. Comfort tells you that staying the same is safer than stretching into something greater. But growth never happens in the comfort zone. Comfort says tomorrow. Faith says now. There's a man I know who struggled with addiction for 15 years. He kept saying, "I'll quit after this weekend. I just need one more hit, one more drink, one more fix." But years went by. He lost his job, his family, his health, until one night, lying alone in a shelter, he cried out to God, not with fancy words, but with desperation. And that night something broke. Not the addiction yet, but the silence. He said, "I can't wait anymore." That moment of urgency led him to a recovery program, to community, to healing. And he told me, "The pain didn't push me to change. My delay did." We think we've got time. That's the illusion. We live like we're guaranteed next week, next month, next year. But the truth is, every second is borrowed breath. Every morning is mercy knocking on your soul, saying, "Get up, get right, get ready." I talked to a man who had a dream to launch a ministry for years. He had the vision, the plan, but fear and procrastination kept him bound. He said, "I'll start once I get more support." Then he said, "I'll start once I save enough money." Then it was, "I'll start after the holidays." Years passed. His fire dimmed. And one day he realized he'd become so good at preparing for his purpose that he never stepped into it. He was in love with the idea, but afraid of the execution. You see, delayed purpose becomes deferred passion. And when you defer passion too long, you start doubting whether it ever mattered in the first place. There's a woman who wanted to forgive her father. He abandoned her as a child. She held on to the pain for decades. But every time she thought about releasing it, she said, "Not now, I'm not ready." One day, she got the call. He passed away. She never got to say what she needed to say. She never got closure. And now she wrestles with the guilt of a healing that came too late.
She told me, I thought holding on would make me strong, but it just made me heavy, and now I have to carry what I never released. Some of us are waiting for a perfect sign from heaven, but God already gave it. It's called today. The breath in your lungs is your green light. You don't need another confirmation. You need courage. You don't need more time. You need more truth. There's a young entrepreneur I know who launched his dream in the middle of a recession. Everyone told him to wait, to play it safe, but he felt the fire in his belly say, do it now. And now, that business has employed dozens of people. He said, if I waited for the economy to align, I would have missed my assignment. Don't wait to pray until you're in a crisis. Don't wait to read the word until you're in warfare. Don't wait to worship until you're desperate. Seek him early. Seek him now. Because delayed devotion is still disobedience. God doesn't just want weekend visitors. He wants daily relationship. And the enemy knows, if he can't destroy you, he'll distract you until you self-destruct. That's why procrastination is so deadly. It doesn't feel like sin, but it robs you of sacred moments. I talked to a teacher who wanted to mentor kids outside school hours. She had the heart, but she kept delaying it for years. One day, one of her brightest students dropped out. She said, if only I'd acted sooner. You see, your obedience could be someone else's breakthrough. When you delay, you not only miss your moment, you might delay someone else's miracle. Your yes isn't just for you. It's for every life connected to your purpose, every soul waiting on your light. The longer you wait to move in obedience, the more the enemy builds walls of doubt around your confidence. He whispers, you missed your window. You're too old, too broken, too late. But I came to break that lie today. It's not too late, but it is too important to keep waiting. Because while you're waiting on the right moment, heaven is waiting on your movement. There's a reason why a seed doesn't sprout the moment it's planted. It's not because it's not alive. It's because growth takes root in silence, beneath the surface, in the dark, where no one claps, no one notices, no one even believes. But just because they can't see your progress, doesn't mean it's not happening. Just because it's quiet, doesn't mean God is absent. Some of the greatest transformations happen when heaven goes silent. I remember a young woman who came to me in tears. She said, I pray every day, but I feel like God isn't listening. I don't hear anything. I don't feel anything. Am I doing something wrong? And I looked her in the eyes and said, sometimes silence is not punishment. It's preparation. God's not ignoring you. He's building you in a frequency higher than noise. Heaven doesn't shout. Heaven whispers. And it takes a surrendered soul to hear what the world can't. Look at the life of Moses. 40 years in the wilderness. Alone, forgotten, unseen. But it was in that silent season that God was sculpting the deliverer out of the runaway. The fire didn't come in Pharaoh's palace. It came in the solitude of a desert. That burning bush moment didn't happen in front of a crowd. It happened in isolation. And you better believe, it wasn't just about calling Moses. It was about quieting him long enough to hear the call. There's a man I know who was laid off from his job after 15 years of loyalty. He had a wife, 2 kids, and no backup plan. At first he panicked. He applied to over 200 jobs in 2 months. Silence, no callbacks, no interviews, no leads. He told me, it felt like the world muted me. But in that silence, something started to shift. He began writing, spending real time with his children. He said, I didn't realize how much noise I lived in, until the silence showed me my own soul. Months later, he launched a coaching business, helping other fathers find balance in work and home life. What looked like rejection was redirection. What felt like silence was a sacred reset. We have this obsession with noise, validation, notifications, applause. If it's not loud, we think it's not real. But the truth is, anything rooted in eternity doesn't need volume to have value. Sometimes God silences everything around you, just so he can speak within you. Silence isn't the absence of activity. It's the presence of intimacy. That's why Jesus often withdrew from the crowds. He didn't need the noise to know he was loved. He didn't chase the spotlight. He chased solitude with the Father. There's a girl who was heartbroken after a 5-year relationship ended without closure. For months she heard nothing from the man who once promised forever. Friends told her to move on, but she was stuck, more by the silence than the breakup. She said, "The silence is louder than his words ever were." And yet, in that stillness, she began to rediscover herself. She took solo trips. She learned to dance again. She stopped asking, "Why me?" and started asking, "What now?" She said, "The silence didn't break me. It saved me. Because it forced me to finally hear my own voice, not his." Even nature teaches us. Trees don't grow with fireworks. Flowers don't bloom with applause. They grow slowly, silently, steadily. Roots run deep in silence. And the same is true for faith. If your relationship with God only thrives when He's speaking audibly, then you've fallen in love with His voice, not His presence. But when you can sit in a quiet room, no miracles, no signs, no one, just you and God, and still say, "I trust you," that's faith matured. That's trust graduated. That's spiritual intimacy. There's a pastor I once knew who went through a 5-year dry season. No growth in the church, no spiritual goosebumps. He said, "It felt like I was preaching to a wall." But he kept showing up, kept preparing sermons, kept praying. Then one Sunday, out of nowhere, a revival broke loose. People weeping, healings happening, lives changing. And I asked him what happened. He smiled and said, "I didn't learn how to preach better. I learned how to trust in silence." That was the test. And when God saw I wouldn't walk away in the quiet, He trusted me with the crowd. So many people want elevation, but they reject isolation. But baby, the oil flows in the crushing. The anointing falls in the hiding. The power descends in the silence. When God's quiet, it doesn't mean He left. Sometimes He's just watching to see if you'll worship when no one's watching. If you'll serve without a stage. If you'll give without being seen. If you'll believe when there's no backup plan. No miracle on the way. No lightning in the sky. You know what's wild? The most important day in human history, the day Jesus was in the tomb, was silent. Heaven didn't speak. The earth didn't shake. No angels appeared. Just silence. But on that silent Saturday, the devil thought he won. What he didn't realize was, silence doesn't mean surrender. It means setup. Because Sunday was coming. And when that stone rolled away, it proved one thing. The silence was working even when no one knew. So if you're in a season where God seems silent, don't panic. Don't rush. Don't walk away. Be still. Be faithful. Because sometimes the silence is not where He forgets you. It's where He finishes you. I want you to think about the moments in your life where you felt like giving up. Like the battle was too great, the storm too fierce, or the mountain too high. And I want you to ask yourself, what kept you going? Because I can tell you this, your ability to keep going when you feel like stopping, when everything inside you screams quit, is where your greatness is forged. There's a story I remember vividly, about a woman named Angela. Angela was a single mother, working 3 jobs, trying to make ends meet, raising her children alone. She was tired. Every day was a grind, and it seemed like no one noticed the sacrifices she made. One day, she came to me with tears in her eyes and said, "I'm so tired, I feel invisible. No matter how hard I try, it's never enough." I looked at her and I said, "Angela, there's a difference between surviving and living. You're surviving right now, but you are not done yet. God didn't make you to survive. He made you to thrive. Your greatness is in your willingness to keep moving, even when you can't see the end of the road." We talk about faith, and we talk about hope, but do we truly understand what it takes to have unshakable faith? Unshakable faith doesn't mean that you believe everything will go as planned, that everything will be smooth sailing, that you won't face setbacks. No, unshakable faith is the belief that even in the worst of storms, you will not be moved. It's believing that the things you're walking through today are shaping you for something greater tomorrow, even when you can't see how. I'll tell you a story about another person who displayed this kind of faith. It's the story of a man named David, who went from a shepherd boy to a king. We all know the story of David and Goliath, right? But here's what most people miss. David was not just facing Goliath. He was facing the doubts, the fear, the giants inside of him. And when he stepped out to fight, he had no idea how God was going to use him. The circumstances didn't look promising. He was small, untrained for battle, and looked down on by his own family. But David had something that Goliath didn't have, a belief in the unseen power of God. And even when the giant stood before him, David didn't let fear paralyze him. He moved forward with the courage to face his giant, knowing that even if he fell, he would fall trying. And let me ask you this: how many giants are standing in your life right now? How many battles are you fighting in silence that no one else knows about? How many fears are you carrying that no one can see? The truth is, most of us have a Goliath we're afraid to face. It may not be a literal giant, but it's that deep fear that holds us back from stepping into our greatness. That's the reason we play small. We look at our situation, we see the size of the challenge, and we believe the lie that we can't overcome it. But the truth is, you can overcome it, not in your own strength, but in the strength of the God who called you to fight. Look at the example of a woman named Clara. Clara was a teacher, and she was facing an immense challenge in her school. The system was broken, the students were disinterested, and the pressure was mounting. She had a choice: either quit or stand tall. She chose to stand tall, but not alone. She turned to God and said, "I'm not doing this by myself. I'm doing this with you." Every day, she would walk into that classroom with a prayer in her heart. And despite the brokenness around her, she began to see miracles. Children who had once been uninterested started to engage. Her classroom began to turn into a place of growth, a place where both her students and she were transformed. Her faith wasn't in the school system. Her faith wasn't in her abilities alone. It was in the power of God working through her. I remember reading about a man named Thomas Edison. He failed more times than most people ever attempt anything in their lifetime. They called him a failure, laughed at him, and said he would never amount to anything. But Thomas Edison didn't accept their label. He didn't quit. In fact, he didn't just believe he could succeed. He believed that failure was just part of the process. And he said something that has stuck with me: "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." That's unshakable faith. It's refusing to see failure as the end, but rather as a lesson on the way to success. The difference between those who succeed and those who quit is not in their ability to avoid challenges, but in their ability to stay anchored when the storm hits. Life is going to throw all kinds of trials your way: pain, betrayal, failure, loss. You will face moments where you feel like giving up. But in those moments, remember this: the strength to keep moving forward, the strength to stand, doesn't come from you. It comes from the God who has already fought your battles. There's an old saying that says, "The darkest hour is just before the dawn." And when you're facing your darkest hour, that's when you need to dig in the deepest. That's when you need to remind yourself that this is not the end. This is the beginning of something beautiful. Your Goliath might be bigger than you, but your God is bigger than your giant. And the thing about facing a giant is that you never know just how strong you are until you're forced to fight. So when the world tells you to quit, when everything inside you tells you to give up, remember this: your breakthrough is often one more step away, and every step you take in faith is a step towards victory. Your Goliath might be big, but your God is bigger. And as long as you keep moving, keep fighting, keep trusting, you will see the victory.